We understand that in the face of repression and attack, we must clarify our positions and continue to fight together against systemic racism, classism, imperialism, transphobia, homophobia, and other forms of oppression, and challenge injustice together. I am so pleased to introduce our speakers today. Parseo values our close partnership with JVP, especially at this critical moment. And we know the power of political and liberatory education that happens within, outside of, and among both autonomous, informal spaces, as well as formal academic institutions. And the speakers today have been really pushing those boundaries, pushing their institutions, and pushing our thinking. So this evening, we are going to hear from Dr. Judith Butler, who certainly has pushed my thinking for a long time and who is part of the JVP Academic Council, Dr. Laura Goldblatt, assistant professor at the University of Virginia and part of the JVP Academic Council, Dr. Brooke Lober, lecturer at UC Berkeley and part of the JVP Academic Council, Dr. Lisa Rofel, University of California, Santa Cruz, and the JVP Academic Council, Dr. Barry Trachtenberg, Rubin Presidential Chair of Jewish History at Wake Forest University, JVP Academic Council, Advisory Board of the Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism, and I have to mention his work and insights have also been so important for our anti-Semitism curriculum. And Dr. Atalia Omar, Professor of Religion, Conflict, and Peace Studies at the University of Notre Dame. And without further ado, I will pass this on to the presentation and the slides. Thank you.
I think I am up first. So, okay.
Sorry, just give me 1 sec. I'm sharing my screen so that we can have our slides up. Okay. And it should be here. Thank you, Lisa.
Most of you, first of all, I want to just thank everybody who has come to be in dialogue with us today, and it couldn't be more important to be doing this now, so thank you. And thank you to the AAUP for organizing this day of action. Most of you have probably heard of the Heritage Foundation, a right-wing policy organization founded in the 1970s, dedicated to reducing the size of government, giving military weapons to anti-communist organizations around the world, and taking control of universities in order to get rid of academic freedom. The Heritage Foundation provoked widespread outrage recently with the publication of their Project 2025, a policy agenda that targets immigrants and trans people, attacks abortion access, proposes to erode voting rights, censors curricula, and prohibits protest and free speech. It serves as Trump's current playbook for smashing academic freedom and suppressing the ability of universities to function as educational institutions. Perhaps fewer of you have heard of Project Esther. Written by Heritage Foundation Christian nationalists and white supremacists, Project Esther is a Christian nationalist appropriation of Jewish culture. Project Esther outlines a strategy for dismantling the Palestine solidarity movement in the United States by deploying false claims of anti-Semitism and terrorism against the movement. It equates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. It lays out a sweeping program of surveillance, propaganda, deportation, and criminalization. Although major conservative Jewish organizations like the Anti-Defamation League did not participate in the creation of Project Esther, they do contribute to the enactment of its plans. Project Esther aligns with university trustees' goals. We must remember that this suppression of students, faculty, and staff for their speech on Palestine did not begin in January 2025. Before the student, faculty, and staff protests and the student encampments, there was already a racist Palestine exception to free speech and academic freedom on university campuses that excludes Palestinian people, ideas, and history from public and intellectual life. Yet there also emerged a global student movement for Palestinian liberation and to oppose a U.S.-funded genocide against Palestinians, which to date has murdered over 61,000 people. In response, universities in the U.S. mobilized state violence against their own students. Student activists across the country are now being abducted and disappeared by the Department of Homeland Security based on their pro-Palestine beliefs. Most university administrations have raised no voice in opposition to this state violence. Spearheaded by our very own Brooke Lober, a group from JVP's Academic Council wrote a 14-page response to Project Esther called Rejecting Project Esther, which is now posted online where you can read it at Contending Modernities. I never thought I would see the day when anti-Semites claim the authority to define anti-Semitism and claim the authority, as detailed in Project Esther, to define who is a real Jew and who is not. But my colleagues of Jewish history in the Academic Council assure me this has happened in the past, as one of them, Barry Trachtenberg, will discuss today. While the Heritage Foundation calls Project Esther their national strategy to combat anti-Semitism, their program does precisely the opposite. Rather than protecting Jews from anti-Semitism, Project Esther deploys anti-Semitic conspiracy theories mixed with the false claim of defending Jews as a smokescreen to attack the Palestinian liberation movement, and by extension, to attack higher education itself. Project Esther manifests, for example, in Donald Trump's executive order signed on January 30, 2025, with the Orwellian title, Additional Measures to Combat Anti-Semitism. This executive order is already being used to criminalize not only protests in solidarity with Palestine, but even simple displays of Palestinian culture, like a flag or a keffiyeh. The Department of Justice's sweeping so-called investigations into alleged anti-Semitism on college campuses and the aggressive efforts to deport Mahmoud Khalil in retaliation for his political activism demonstrate how Project Esther's blueprint for suppression is already being implemented through governmental mechanisms of surveillance and punishment, such as deportations. We have seen the grave consequences of this logic play out across institutions of higher education. Students are being disciplined for holding silent study-ins in their campus libraries. Professors are being banned from their own classrooms and having their syllabi interrogated by administrators because of their participation in nonviolent protests. Some have even been fired for sharing the words of Palestinian poets on their personal social media pages, such as happened to Professor Mara Finkelstein. All this before Trump took office. From Benjamin Netanyahu to U.S. entities, including institutions claiming to represent American Jews and university administrations, we have heard Jewish safety invoked in the service of committing genocide, while those speaking against genocide have been slandered as anti-Semites. As Jews, we denounce Project Esther's manipulation of our community's experiences of oppression and our cultural identity for a racist anti-Palestinian project that seeks to shore up the U.S.-Israel alliance. As Jews, we recognize that this anti-Semitic ideology functions as a means to discredit all movements for social change by tainting them with the supposed crime of anti-Semitism. Conciliation and self-censorship will not save any educational institution from being dismantled by an authoritarian regime openly committed to the destruction of higher education, nor will it protect our students who are being targeted by state violence. Some institutions, organizations, and academic workers are challenging these actions. We encourage all of you to get your university administrations to follow their lead. We urge you to be bold and call out the anti-Semitism that these right-wing robber barons want to hide in plain sight, and that we all stand up together for the right to speak about Palestinian liberation. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe I'm next. Hi, everyone. really glad that we are having this conversation and to be here. And I will speak about Esther, the appropriation of Esther, and specifically in terms of the Christian right. So Christian nationalists' cynical use of the Jewish story of Purim, specifically the character of Queen Esther, amounts to a form of cultural appropriation, obviously. The appropriation of Esther's figure has long roots in right-wing Christian movements that emphasize her as a female role model, juxtaposed to Vashti, who disobeyed the king and refused to be paraded and abused for the king's entertainment. It is no wonder, of course, that Vashti is foregrounded by feminist interpreters of the tradition. Christian fundamentalists, such as Joyce Rogers, whose spouse was a central figure in the fundamentalist takeover of Southern Baptists in the 1980s, wrote about Esther as a Christian hero who saved her nation while being under patriarchal authority of Mordecai, and thus acting presumably normatively in terms of the theology of complementarity. Other prominent female complements of right-wing Christian Zionist and fundamentalist leaders, such as Diana Hagee, wife of John Hagee, who leads the anti-Semitic Zionist organization of over 10 million members, Christian United for Israel, that often presents itself as philo-Semitic. She deployed Esther as a female role model whose agency is tied to the men who have authority over her as part of a broader cosmology or ontology, referring to the nature of things as they are in essence. Hagee taught girls how to claim your place as a king's daughter. She used the story of Esther in cultivating girls to assume their roles as good Christian women. Esther's submissiveness to the king's whims while taking on a savior role under the instructions of Mordecai is what such fundamentalist Christian appropriation has meant in preparing young girls, especially to become quote unquote Christ brides. Beyond the deployment and recasting of Esther as an ideal submissive Christian woman, other more charismatic Christians appropriated her story for spiritual warfare, rooted also in the 1980s changing religio-political and social landscapes in the US. Spiritual warfare perceives an actual battle against demons who inhabit key institutions in society. Many embedded in such demonology also showed up, for instance, for the January 6th insurrection, blowing shofars and chanting and praying. Queen Esther is appropriated within this charismatic movement to highlight the role of women as pivotal spiritual warriors because of their disciplined cultivation of submissive virtues. There is a massive industry of books and other cultural productions promoting Esther in her role as this spiritual or cultural warrior intent on excising the demonic from society. And this also converges with the Christian recasting of Esther as a revolutionary actor, disrupting status quo. Likewise, there is a powerful charismatic Christian tradition that appropriate Esther for male warriors, or so-called warriors, whose authority comes directly from God in their desire to disrupt the status quo. For example, in a speech in Congress nominating Jim Jordan for Speaker of the House, Elise Stefanik of New York referred to Esther. And I quote, "As this body convenes for the sacred responsibility to elect the next Speaker of the People's House, I'm reminded of the Book of Esther for such a time as this. Jim Jordan will be America's Speaker." Jordan eventually withdrew, but Esther was once again quoted by Mike Johnson, who eventually assumed the position. This background of the appropriation of Esther in fundamentalist, charismatic, and right-wing Christian spaces explains why Project Esther telegraphs the convergence of white Christian nationalists and Christian Zionists. It is situated within a longer Christian Zionist tradition that operated on a kind of a supersessionist account of the relation between Judaism and Christianity, underpinned also by the construct of the so-called Judeo-Christian that assumes no difference between the city on a hill, America, and the hilltop settlement in Palestine. Both are a part of the same so-called Judeo-Christian civilization and theopolitical project that is, of course, underpinned by Islamophobia. Indeed, what is so striking in Project Esther is that it frames any criticism of Israel as a threat to American security, which the Esther Project will defend against. Also, by finally sealing the deal on how Zionism supersedes Judaism. The document explicitly polices who gets to be counted as a Jew, and it explicitly names JVP as not really Jewish or a gullible enabler of the Hamas network, as we'll talk about later, that infiltrated American society and institutions, and primarily with a focus on institutions of higher learning. The image of Esther that is appropriate into the spiritual battle, the ideology of complementarity, and the white supremacist anti-woke assault under the premise of defending against anti-Semitism is, of course, very selective. Those narratives portray Esther as a savior, but we all know that the Purim story is also a story of a massacre and revenge against non-Jews. The image of Amalek, interpreted as a revengeful license, has therefore deeper roots in Israeli history than the Gaza genocide, where it's explicitly cited. Kahanism, which is most associated with the Amalek language, the revenge language, gained momentum with people such as Baruch Goldstein, a mass murderer in 1994, Yigal Amir, the assassin of Yitzhak Rabin in 1995, and Itamar Ben-Gvir, the leader of the political party Jewish Power and Minister of National Security during the Gaza genocide. These characters derived inspiration from Kahana's racialized ethno-religious militancy. Goldstein, for example, perpetrated the massacre in Hebron's Ibrahimi Mosque in 1994 in his effort to hold the Oslo Accords that stipulated territorial concessions. This murderous act also coincided with the reading of the Amalek narrative in Shabbat Zechor, a week before Esther Megillah's reading on the Purim holiday. This Kahanist outburst points to an apparent realist lesson. Haman, who threatened to exterminate the Jews, came into being because King Saul spared Agag. Therefore, to fight Haman, which is what Esther presumably is doing, Israelis need to destroy Amalek totally. After October 7th, this realism became more common because of the antecedent prevalent secular counterterrorism military discourse predicated on Islamophobic and anti-Arab dehumanization. However, such zero-sum realism also permeated earlier discussions of the inevitability of the Nakba for Jewish self-determination and post-Holocaust survival. Undoubtedly, the Gaza genocide revealed the mainstreaming of this Kahanism, both in terms of the Amalekization of the Palestinians and the related Nakba imaginary of cleansing Gaza. The official YouTube channel, Anafim, an organization led by Rabbi Yigal Cohen, posted on the December 7, 2023, a clip of a large group of soldiers in uniforms and weapons dancing in Gaza while chanting the verses from Deuteronomy about bolting out Amalek. In another clip broadcasted on Channel 14 under the logo, "With God's help, together we will win," the anchors and the reporter from the ground are relishing in a scene of recitation of the Purim Megillah amid the background of Gaza's destruction on March 24, 2024. The chanting soldiers begin to recite the Esther story when the first mention of Haman triggers another soldier's indiscriminate and prolonged shooting spree with joyful cries of other surrounding soldiers. The segment featuring this Gaza Megillah reading is called "The Beautiful Moments of the People of Israel." When the camera returns from the scene in Gaza to the studio, the female anchor concludes with a grin, as they say, lemehadrin, referring to people incredibly meticulous in their observance of Jewish rituals. Critically, the revengeful reading of Amalek diverges from many historic rabbinic interpreters of this and other as ethically challenging commandments such as collective punishment as a reenactment of the Shimon and Levi's assault on all the men of the city of Shem or Nablus in retaliation for the rape of their sister Dinah in Genesis 34. References to this revenge story also permeated Gaza in graffiti on destroyed Palestinian homes. What gets obscured and subverted is the counter-post-biblical traditions that resisted revengeful behavior and the conquest discourse of Joshua bin Nun and the Davidic era. For the sages, as Nitzan Kaspi Shiloni writes in a publication of the Faithful Left, the kind of honor they exalted is one of mutual respect and right relations between one person and another, not revenge based on national honor. Blotting out Amalek is certainly not the sage's work plan for post-biblical Judaism, Kaspi says. The point about tracing the Christian appropriation and Zionist interpretation of Amalek and Purim and Esther in that respect is not to claim a presumably more authentic Jewish legacy, but to reject genocide and ethnic cleansing against Palestinians and to think critically and historically with the textual tradition about Esther, rejecting its manipulation and deployment and appropriation for regressive policies. Thank you.
Am I next?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Institutions like Columbia University are under an obligation to prevent reprisals against members of their community who express their views publicly on matters of principle, often matters of principle such as justice. But as Columbia, along with other universities like UCLA and University of Pennsylvania, feed the names of protesters to the federal administration or the police or ICE voluntarily, they become the very instruments of reprisal they are meant to protect against. And every time they engage in such an activity, they become complicit and help to build a new authoritarian consensus. The contemporary willingness of universities to retaliate or to let the government retaliate through using their instruments not only destroys the extramural protections that belong to academic freedom, but activates a set of fascist passions bent on destroying fundamental rights, including rights of expression and assembly, but also protection against detention, abduction, and deportation. Let us recall that academic freedom consists not only in the right of faculty to design and teach their courses as they see fit, according to their training and their credentials, but also it gives them the right to participate in structures of self-governance, to engage in extramural speech, that is, speech outside the classroom, without fear of retaliation or reprisal. The meaning and limits of extramural speech, conceived as part of academic freedom, have become important precisely now at the moment of their potential destruction. And although academic freedom was designed for a certain kind of faculty member on a permanent track, it should ideally extend to all members of the university community. At this point, when somebody takes a political stand outside the walls of the classroom and is then imagined to espouse those same views inside the classroom, a certain presumption is taking place. An imagined link is substituting for any demonstrable claim, and the attribution is taken to be true rather than taken to be an unfounded allegation concocted for instrumental reasons. So many of us are teachers and we take political stands outside the classroom, but when we come inside the classroom, we do not demand that everybody agree with our view. And sometimes we don't even say what our view might be. One argument made against Stephen Salaita years ago, who was denied a position at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana after a series of tweets opposing the bombardment of Gaza in 2014 were brought to light, was that those tweets should be considered to be an extension of his academic knowledge of the field or of his position, and that one would thereby be right to infer from the content of his extramural utterances that he certainly demonstrates intolerance or imbalance in the classroom. Well, actually, no evidence was given for that claim. He had excellent teaching reviews. Nobody said he's incredibly biased or anything of the like. That case prefigured the increasing number of cases of suspension and termination or non-employment that have proliferated in recent months. The current federal administration permitted and facilitated the abduction and detention of student organizer Mahmoud Khalil on March 8th of this year. Danny Shaw was fired from his faculty position at the City University of New York after 18 years of service, after a vicious spate of online harassment. Amin Hussein was fired from New York University after being interrogated on his statements that were considered anti-Zionist, a case that shows the full damage of the overbroad International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition that includes anti-Zionism as an instance of anti-Semitism. By the way, before the 1970s, anti-Zionism would never be considered an instance of anti-Semitism. It then became one in the course of the 70s, although that had to be argued. There was hardly a consensus on it. But now it seems that anti-Zionism is the paradigm of anti-Semitism, which means that the history of anti-Semitism and a concrete, detailed understanding of what it consists of has been lost. You know as well that following an alumni letter that garnered 6,000 signatories in November 2023, Muhlenberg College terminated tenured professor Maura Finkelstein, who's now a member of the Academic Council, from her position in the Department of Anthropology for retweeting a post that the college newspaper reported as expressing pro-Palestinian speech. Professor Mohammed Abdu was terminated at Columbia. Professor Catherine Franke was investigated and pushed into retirement by Columbia for extramural expressions she made. And the situation has hardly been helped by the fact that the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education, in its review of the Finkelstein termination, maintained that social media posts by a professor outside the classroom can create a hostile environment for students, thereby preventing them from benefiting fully from a school's educational programs, right? So what was a question in 2014 for Salaita has been answered in the case of Finkelstein. This reverse passage over the wall that distinguishes extra from intramural is based on an imagined relation between the two that takes form as an attribution and an allegation. This fearful or malicious conjecture takes up the position where demonstrable evidence should be found. The vitiation of evidence through persecutory imaginings is one way that legal protections can be destroyed, especially when that way of imagining effectively becomes a new consensus. Instead of serving democratic ideals, universities engaging in such practices solicit state intervention and even shamelessly boast of their own retaliatory powers to placate authorities, including donors and governments, with the power to stabilize the institution's financial future. And now that federal authorities are demanding reprisal against faculty for having espoused political positions that should be protected from reprisal, should be protected from retaliation, we see administrations ready to crush their obligation of providing extramural protections to community members in order to appease the federal government and keep their funds. The government prefers non-tenured targets, students and adjuncts, unprotected by academic freedom, which is, strictly speaking, a faculty right, but whose extramural rights to debate issues on campus implies that student and staff should be able to do the same. This is precisely the kind of external intervention into campus decisions regarding faculty, their units, their employment, their extramural protections, that extramural protections were meant to protect against. Indeed, as the social responsibility of universities becomes increasingly equated with fiscal responsibility, administrators now say that retaliation against those who have engaged in protests or speech affirming Palestinian freedom is their social or public responsibility. Their responsibility, as they define it, is repression, is detention, is expulsion. Support for Palestine is made equivalent to terrorist mongering, terrorist sympathizing, and no distinction is made between those who seek justice, freedom, equality for Palestine without anti-Semitic sentiment or action, and those whose slogans are indeed offensive and anti-Semitic. To be for Palestine is to make the Jewish people feel unsafe. Is that true? Which Jewish people are being represented by such a claim? And what of those Jews? What about those Jews who support the Palestinian struggle for freedom? The Project Esther, authored by the same Heritage Foundation that gave us Project 2025, claims to be protecting the Jewish people by naming all supporters of Palestinian freedom and all critics of Israeli violence as part of a Hamas support network. Now, of course, such a network does not exist. It exists only in the moment and as the effect of the allegation itself. The allegation brings into being this specter, this imaginary network, not as a demonstrable reality, but as a bid for an imaginary consensus. That is to say, let's get everyone to imagine that this network exists, that it's all pro-Hamas, that anything in favor of Palestinian freedom, anything opposed to Israeli state violence is nothing other than this vast Hamas network. It's the same, by the way, I would add, with gender ideology. It also does not exist. And critical race theory, well, it does exist, but it's unread, inflated, distorted, and caricatured by those who seek to drive it from the academy. But who is this Heritage Foundation that claims that we must all oppose the Hamas support network in order to save the Jewish people, in order to protect the Jewish people? Are they offering themselves as a messiah for the Jewish people? My response to that is, we would rather wait. We're going to keep waiting, right? That's the thing we do. We wait, and we're going to continue to wait. Let's remember that no Jewish people were involved in the drafting of this document, and no mention is made of anti-Semitism on the far right, including the Christian nationalist movement, whose think tank is the Heritage Foundation itself. Their president, Kevin Roberts, opens Project 2025, calling for our God-given individual rights to live freely against a woke threat. Today, he writes, the left is threatening the tax-exempt status of churches and charities that reject woke progressivism. Well, whose tax-exempt status is being threatened? Well, it is a number of universities, a number of foundations, and a number of nonprofits who have hosted debates on the Israeli genocidal actions in Gaza, or who have made room for public debate or for research on such issues. Kevin Roberts says they will soon turn to Christian schools and clubs with the same totalitarian intent. Well, who is exercising this totalitarian intent, threatening to bring down universities, threatening to bring down foundations and nonprofits? As Ken Dove put it in the foreword, Project Esther has its sights on what it describes as a much broader coalition of leftist progressive organizations, such as Open Society Foundations, Tides Foundation, and numerous others. It calls for using tools including anti-terrorism and anti-racketeering criminal prosecution, which has already happened, deportations, which has already happened, public firings, yes, removal of tax-exempt status, blocking of funding, campaigns to sow discord within movements to disrupt and degrade these organizations. So when your friends say to you, what is happening? What is going on? What are these strategies? Please have them read Project 2025 and the Project Esther document. Let me also say that the federal government, following upon the advice of the Heritage Foundation, has sought to destroy administrative obligations to protect extramural speech against reprisal against faculty and all members of university communities. Instead, in the spirit of capitulation, they now understand their obligation to be enacting those very forms of reprisal and retaliation. They have offered themselves up as the instruments of retaliation. The protection against state interference, which academic freedom was supposed to provide, have only become weaker as the threat of the withdrawal of federal funds lures administrations into destroying those protections. And when both the extramural speech of faculty and the free speech of students and staff are attacked or destroyed, or when whole disciplines are targeted or dismantled, open debate on campus and freedom of inquiry become radically chilled, if not frozen, and retaliation becomes an accepted norm, even an administrative obligation to the state, which means that a retaliatory passion or a vengeful politics that longs to display itself in the crushing of rights for existing citizens or for visitors on visas or international students or migrants, all of this turns out to be massively displayed in abduction, detention, and deportation, forcible displacement. So when university policies commit the injustice of allowing unfounded allegations to serve as pretext for suspension or termination, for detention and deportation, a curiously brutal legal situation emerges worthy of Kafka. Protections for both due process and extramural speech are overridden and deconstituted in the name of following the law, or the federal mandate, or the order, or the ransom note written on presidential letterhead. And when those exceptions start to proliferate, producing a kind of negative constellation or chain of negative precedents, a counter law in the name of law, then unfounded conjecture and allegation, broad allegations structured by phantasmatic staging and excitation come to reign. All protesters are anti-Semitic, all encampments, even the most peaceful, are endangering Jewish students. Is this true, or are such imaginings liberated from due process or review, liberated from evidence? Unfounded allegations they are, and they become the basis for what? Normalizing retaliation and holding those who still honor extramural protections as weak, as complicit with the crime, or as failing their public responsibilities. We should fight anti-Semitism as it exists, whether it's on the left, in the center, or on the Christian right. And as educators, we need to teach the history of anti-Semitism, its logics, its examples, in order to show how this recent and overbroad definition proposed by the IHRA and inflated by the Heritage Foundation is wrong. To fight anti-Semitism and all racisms, including anti-Palestinian racism, we have to know what they are. And that means we must read and we must know and we must be in conversation. We have to have history, literature, law, the arts. But to say that standing for justice is an anti-Semitic thing to do is not only to reject the history of anti-Semitism that we know, which is unjust, but to allow the criminalization of dissent and protest, and to confess a radical ignorance of the long history of Jewish social ethics and the value of its solidarity with the oppressed. Thank you.
Brooke, am I okay to start? See, there's some technical questions. You're muted, Brooke.
Ooh, sorry everyone for a technical issue. I think I'm ready to share the screen again. Sorry about that. Give me 1 sec.
Yeah. Gives us a minute to absorb everything Judith just laid out for us.
I'm so sorry. It's my settings. I really apologize, everyone. I'm just gonna have to try doing it this way. Okay, thanks. Sorry. Does that look good to everybody? Okay, please take it away, Barry. Thank you.
Yeah, and if we could go on to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. Perfect, thank you. So as Talia and Judith have mentioned, one of the most disturbing aspects of the Heritage Foundation's Project Esther is its fabrication of a fictional entity termed the Hamas Support Network, the HSN. This manufactured network allegedly encompasses virtually all pro-Palestinian organizations, student groups, academic programs, and individual activists in the United States. What makes this fabrication particularly disturbing is how it mirrors the very anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that have targeted Jews throughout history, most notably through the protocols of the Elders of Zion. To understand this parallel, it's helpful to examine anti-Semitism's historical development in Europe. Throughout the Middle Ages, Jews held a distinctive status as the internal other within Christian society, while Muslims were portrayed as the threatening external other. This binary othering system enabled European Christian identity to establish itself in opposition to both groups, creating a framework that rationalized the persecution of both. European Judeophobia expressed itself through accusations of Christ killing, ritual murder allegations, and depictions of Jews as adversaries of Christianity. These charges incited violent mob assaults on Jewish communities during historical periods, such as the Crusades and the Christian recapture of the Iberian Peninsula. Jewish communities faced methodical banishments from entire states, such as England, France, Spain, Portugal, and various German principalities throughout the medieval era. In the modern, more secularized period, hatred against Jews, increasingly referred to as anti-Semitism, was also manifested through accusations of Jews plotting to undermine economic systems, of revolutionary activity, or of trying to infiltrate national groups through their assimilation. What links each of these forms of anti-Judaism was the notion that Jews were utterly incommensurate with the societies that they were a part of, and a belief that Jews were seeking to undermine society's foundations in order to seize systems of control. This long history helped set the historical justification for the Holocaust, an event of such unprecedented brutality in Jewish history that it shifted the world's perception of Jews. As Judith has just referred to, in the post-Holocaust era, a new liberal narrative began to emerge that reimagined Jews not as the unassimilable other, but as the ultimate victims of history. This narrative suggested that atonement for past sins must be manifested through uncritical support for Israel as a Jewish state. The infamous Protocols of the Elders of Zion, if we could go to that slide, a forgery purporting to document the Jewish plot for global domination, represents the most notorious example of anti-Semitic conspiracy theorizing. Where the protocols fabricate an elaborate Jewish global conspiracy, Project Esther mirrors this by inventing the equally fictional Hamas support network. This document describes this purported network using language that echoes classical anti-Semitic stereotypes, speaking, quote, of vast networks of activists and funders pursuing insidious goals to undermine democracy and capitalism. Just as the protocols depicted Jews as dedicated to the wholesale destruction of Western civilization, Christianity, and capitalism, Project Esther portrays the Hamas support network as an existential threat to American values and way of life. The document's portrayal of the Hamas support network as having penetrated and subverted major American institutions mirrors one of the most pernicious aspects of anti-Semitic literature, the notion of Jewish hidden infiltration of society's power centers. Where anti-Semitic tracts claim Jewish agents had secretly gained control of banking, media, and government to advance a global conspiracy, Project Esther now similarly depicts the HSN as having operatives who've covertly embedded themselves throughout Congress, universities, civil society organizations, and news outlets. This parallel extends beyond mere structure into rhetoric. Both employ images of infiltration, penetration, and subversion to suggest these supposed networks have compromised vital institutions from within. Just as anti-Semitic literature portrayed Jews as masters of deception who could appear outwardly respectable while secretly undermining society, Project Esther characterizes HSN members as skilled manipulators who have gained influential positions while concealing their true aims. This fabrication of the HSN serves several strategic purposes. It contributes to the Orientalist demonization of Hamas and Palestinians more generally. It allows for the criminalization of legitimate political activities by falsely associating them with terrorism. It erases the actual diversity of perspective within the Palestinian solidarity movement. And it creates a guilt by association framework that can be expanded to target other progressive movements. This recycling of classic anti-Semitic tropes about shadowy infiltrators who are corrupting societal institutions is particularly alarming given how such conspiracy theories have historically been used to justify persecution. The structural similarity demonstrates how anti-Semitic frameworks can be repurposed, targeting non-Jewish others while maintaining their essential characteristics. Perhaps the most profound and tragic irony is that while claiming to combat anti-Semitism, Project Esther diverts attention from the actual sources of anti-Jewish violence in America today. White supremacist and Christian nationalist movements, the very ideological camps from which the Heritage Foundation emerges, pose the greatest threats to Jewish communities. From the Tree of Life massacres to the torchlight marches of Charlottesville, where participants chanted, "Jews will not replace us," actual anti-Semitic violence comes not from Palestinian solidarity activists, but from right-wing movements that Project Esther strategically ignores. By focusing exclusively on criticism of Israel's defining threat to Jewish communities, Project Esther obscures the very real danger posed by white supremacist movements, who are responsible for nearly all violent anti-Semitic attacks in the United States in recent years. It allows these movements to advance their broader agendas while posing as defenders of Jewish safety through their support of Israel. This misdirection is not accidental, but it's strategic. By positioning Palestinian liberation as inherently threatening Jewish safety, Project Esther attempts to force a false choice between supporting Jewish communities and supporting Palestinian rights. This framing ignores many Jewish individuals and organizations who are actively engaged in Palestine solidarity work and erases the possibility of a future where both peoples can live with dignity, freedom, and safety. In recognizing these dynamics, we can better understand how anti-Semitism continues to function as a political tool, not only as Jews, but increasingly against other marginalized communities through the recycling of its conspiratorial structures and logics.
Hi, thanks to all who are here. And I just want to send a lot of love to my Charlottesville community. And I'm going to show, actually, because I think we're short on time, I'm going to probably not show too many clips, but there's some discussion of the Unite the Right rally in August 2017 in Charlottesville. So I think those events are a really spectacular instance of anti-Semitism and racism in Charlottesville, Virginia, show an uninterrupted through line between the history of anti-Semitism that Barry just provided and present day anti-Semitism in the United States and globally. So the Unite the Right rally solicited and received endorsements from groups in Greece like the Golden Dawn. And I think what's key to that is seeing and positioning Jews as these shadowy people who are manipulating things in the background. And I think we see that line really clearly. The Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville also shows how deeply anti-Semitism is imbricated with other racial and ethnic enmities, including anti-Black racism, xenophobia, and Islamophobia, and the particular role that anti-Semitism plays in this nexus of hate-based ideologies. Last, it shows very starkly that white Christian nationalism, the very groups that the Heritage Foundation is drawing upon, is the greatest threat to Jewish safety in the US, not least because of how the cry for a homeland for all people, so this is what they claim, everyone needs to go to their own space, immediately turns into a call for the displacement of anyone who is not a white Christian and genocide. That is to say that while ethnic nationalists sometimes say that all they want is for all races and ethnicities to have the rightful place, their actions in Charlottesville and elsewhere show instead their exterminationist ends. So on this slide, I'm just showing a few of the slides, some of the flags that the white nationalists used, and you can see that they draw upon Nazi ideology, but also an older European ideology and imagery, I think, to show the ways that they're drawing on this deep history where Jews are posited as a kind of other, and that it unites a sense of what they're fighting against. So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to skip, I think, the clips about that show things happening in Charlottesville. So many of you will remember, some of us unfortunately were there. White supremacists bearing torches marched through the University of Virginia grounds on August 11th, 2017, the day before the Unite the Right rally, chanting, "Jews will not replace us, blood and soil," and eventually white lives matter when they confronted anti-racist activists. And so the "Jews will not replace us" line is their voicing of replacement theory, the idea that whiteness is a threatened identity being pushed out by others. And "blood and soil" is a Nazi slogan that linked pure German heritage, the blood, to the nation soil. In its current day context, the slogan functions as a claim that white Christians are the only group with a claim to the land of the United States because their heritage as founders of the United States, their blood, gives them and them alone a right to its territories, the soil. We also see anti-Blackness on display in the call that white lives matter as a retort to the chant Black Lives Matter, which is an attempt to deny Black existence through white supremacy. In a second clip, that those of you who want to watch the whole Vice documentary, Chris Cantwell, who was one of the leaders of the march, sometimes called the Crying Nazi, he talks about how he's trying to make himself explicitly more violent, that he goes to the gym, that he carries guns on him at all times. But he also refers to Jews in that clip as a race, which is an older understanding of race that's much in keeping with what Barry outlines for us. And he underscores that he thinks the Jews are vile, and he says that they pose a risk to white society because they've infiltrated even the president's chambers, and that Ivanka Trump is married to Jared Kushner, who is a Jew and has herself converted to Judaism. And so this is a kind of updating of the protocols of the elders of Zion that insists that an underground cabal of Jewish actors has infiltrated the seats of white power and threatens to replace true whites with themselves. And then last, in this final clip, Brooke, if you can go to, so it's from the second of the two, and the time on it, sorry, I'll have to look at my email, the time on it, I hopefully sent you the Times signature for the second of the two. So the man who referred to himself as the Daily Stormer's man on the ground is being asked some questions about what he's doing. And he says this a lot in a lot of interviews, but he situates his understanding of what's going on. Oh, I don't think we have sound. Okay, it's okay if we don't have sound. We're short on time. So he says like, oh, it's all the Jews are controlling everything. The reporter says,
I can play it, Laura. I can.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Has been usurped by a foreign tribe called the Jews. Are you in charge here? We're going to stop it. What about the blacks? The blacks are the blacks.
Okay, so the reason to play this is that Ben Lorber and others have explained, I'm going to quote at length, for white nationalists, hatred of Jews is deeply intertwined with anti-Black racism. In the 1960s and 1970s, white supremacists, bruised from the victories of the civil rights movement, had to explain how a supposedly inferior race had struck such a powerful blow against institutional white supremacy in the US. For a generation of emerging white nationalist leaders like David Duke, William Pierce, Willis Carto, and others, the answer was clear: it's the Jews. And so here's a quote from William Pierce: "The Blacks in America are not really independent agents and not fully responsible for their actions, but are primarily the tools of another minority, Jews, which uses Black-white race conflict for its own ends." So in the decades following the 1970s, white nationalists argued that the same Jewish conspiracy behind the civil rights movement also promoted non-white immigration, feminism, LGBTQ plus rights, multiculturalism, moral relativism, and virtually every other supposedly toxic progressive ideology and social movement, all with the goal of white genocide. Again, that replacement theory, the disappearance of a white demographic majority in the United States, the destruction of the white race itself. In their eyes, the only hope for white racial regeneration is to create an all-white ethno-state on all or part of US soil where non-white immigration will end and non-whites will be expelled. The continued existence of Black, Latinx, and other non-white people alongside whites in the US presents a clear demographic obstacle to this vision. Ultimately, however, white nationalists believe a deeper enemy is rigging the game. And so Victor Gerhardt in 2003, a neo-Nazi leader, says, "To rail against Blacks and Hispanics without mentioning Jews is like complaining about the symptoms and not the disease." And then another movement leader, Greg Johnson, says that the organized Jewish community is the principal enemy, not the sole enemy, but the principal enemy of every attempt to halt and reverse white extinction. So I want to help to end here with a transition towards Brooke to say that there is a way forward. So on August 12th, 2017, thousands of anti-racist activists responded to a call made by coalitions in Charlottesville to come to Charlottesville and fight back against white supremacy. And they did come. Just after the Virginia governor declared a state of emergency that meant that the Unite the Right rally could not go on, a group of white supremacists began marching towards public housing in Charlottesville, intent on violence and destruction. A group of anti-racist activists, some of those who had come to the call to arrive in Charlottesville, raced to thwart them, successfully diverting the mob and preventing white supremacists from descending on some of Charlottesville's most oppressed residents. These anti-racist activists returned in celebration to Charlottesville Downtown Mall after they had successfully repelled white supremacists, joining with other anti-racist groups on 4th Street just moments before the car attack that injured and maimed dozens of people and took Heather Heyer's life. I think this ending shows us how deadly serious these white supremacists are, how seriously we should be taking the Project Esther report, but it also shows us the power of multiracial and multi-ethnic action to foil white supremacist efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, and thanks everyone. I know we're over time. Mine's short. In the midst of the ongoing Israeli genocide in Gaza, which many have named the first live stream genocide in human history, the Israeli state claims to act on behalf of all Jews. From afar, we witness daily acts of ethnic cleansing as the Israeli army has killed dozens and even hundreds of Palestinian adults and children each day for more than a year. The Israeli state produces conditions of deprivation and misery so profound as to comprise a textbook example of the destruction of a society that Jewish scholar Raphael Lemkin coined the term genocide to name. Let us state what should appear obvious. This mass violence does not counter anti-Semitism at all. Indeed, it reanimates long-standing anti-Jewish sentiment and inspires new forms of anti-Semitic prejudice. Hiding behind the lie of saving Jews, Israeli violence continues and makes a new history of settler genocide. Genocide does not and cannot make anyone safer. We are all made more unsafe in a world where the wholesale destruction of a people is rationalized. As Jews in particular, we denounce the attempt to commit genocide in the name of our safety. As Jews, we declare, not in our name. For the past 400 years and more, European Christian men have produced an anti-Semitic, racist, and sexist image of Jewish women, known as the figure of the Jewess in modern literature. The paradigmatic Jewish heroines of the Torah have provided Christian-dominated European and US culture with their stereotyped sex object par excellence, as Jewish feminist literary scholar Livia E. Bitten argues. versions of Queen Esther who won her place at the king's side through triumph at a beauty contest that was refused by his previous wife, Vashti, have featured prominently in such anti-Semitic discourse. But like so many women who survived the conflagrations of patriarchy, Esther's knowledge and power grew over time, and she became a political and spiritual leader and a fighter for collective Jewish survival because of, and not in spite of, her skilled navigation of gendered and sexualized institutions. Alongside generations of Jewish feminists, we now lovingly reclaim the figure of the beguiling Jewish seductress, whose powers of beauty and sexuality contribute to her assumption of power. We know that we are not in Esther's moment of potential annihilation of Jewish people, as the Heritage Foundation, like Netanyahu's cabinet, and so many contemporary forces would have us believe. Such fear-mongering is quintessential to racist statecraft and has embedded itself into the current war on terror logic that hinges on philo-Semitic lies about the protection of Jews, among others. Against this propaganda, we offer a different recognition. We know that many Jewish people are now faced with a different threat. The threat of alienation from Jewish community and belonging. We oppose traditional institutions that purport to speak for Jewish communities, but manipulate religious texts and principles to advance genocidal statecraft and colonial conquest. We refuse this corruption of our cultural and spiritual heritage, which makes our own institutions and sometimes even our own communities unrecognizable to us as Jews. The Heritage Foundation has no entitlement to represent the protection or salvation of Jewish people or any people. As we have demonstrated here, their attempt to vilify and shame anti-Zionists merely exposes the anti-Semitism at the heart of their nationalist will to dominance. Against this Christian Zionist attempt to hijack our own struggle, against our own experiences of prejudice and oppression, so that they can secure state power, we proclaim the Heritage Foundation has no Project Esther. Instead, we represent the living legacy of Esther. As Jewish anti-Zionists, we will fight for the survival of a different image and a different historical role for the Jewish people. Neither colonizers nor props for state violence and repression, we are proud anti-Zionist Jews engaged in collective struggle for justice, peace, and the survival of a plural and interdependent humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brooke, for reminding us of where we come from, what we need to do to get back there. Thank you all for this presentation, your critical thinking. Thank you, Kahe, and others who have supported this day of action. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And yes, let's be part of a real network, helping to create new connections for resistance and for liberation.